welcome to our deep dive into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, yeah.
You guys chose a classic,
Yes.
and we're going to explore some of his most powerful ideas using excerpts from a YouTube audiobook version.
Awesome.
Um, it's amazing how relevant his insights on human interaction remain, even though the book was written almost a century ago.
It really is, yeah.
Think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet to becoming a master communicator, Carnegie style.
I like that cheat sheet to becoming a master communicator. I love it.
All right, so
Yeah.
the book starts with fundamental techniques in handling people.
Okay.
And his very first principle is don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
Right.
I have to admit, this one really made me stop and think about how I communicate.
Yeah, it's so easy to point out what we see as flaws in others.
Right.
But Carnegie argues that this approach rarely works, and I think he's right.
Yeah.
Instead, we should try to understand people's motivations and express appreciation for them.
Mhm.
He really emphasizes that we're dealing with creatures of emotion, not creatures of logic.
So instead of trying to fix people, maybe we should be focusing on better understanding them.
Yeah.
What struck me was this anecdote Carnegie shared about a man who was so moved by the book, he stayed up all night discussing it with his friends.
Wow.
He was so excited to apply these principles to his own life.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It really shows how these ideas can resonate with people on a deep level.
Yeah.
It's not just about surface level techniques. Carnegie is tapping into something fundamental about human nature.
Another story that stood out to me was about Mark Twain.
Okay.
Apparently his wife used to intercept his angry letters before they could be sent to prevent potential damage.
Oh, wow.
It makes me wonder, how often do we react without thinking and say things we later regret?
That's a brilliant point.
Right.
Carnegie advises that instead of criticizing, we should focus on giving honest and sincere appreciation.
Okay.
And he uses some pretty interesting historical figures to illustrate this, like Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate. He was known for publicly praising his associates and even had their accomplishments inscribed on his tombstone.
Whoa. That's taking appreciation to a whole new level.
That is, yeah.
Do you think that kind of public recognition is more impactful than, say, a private thank you?
That's an interesting question. Public praise can be very motivating, especially for those who thrive on recognition.
Right.
It also sets a positive tone for the entire organization. But a genuine private expression of thanks can be just as meaningful, especially if it's specific and heartfelt.
So it seems like the key is to be genuine in our appreciation, regardless of whether it's public or private.
Absolutely.
It reminds me of the story about John D. Rockefeller, even when one of his partners lost $1 million in a bad investment. Rockefeller didn't criticize.
Oh, wow.
Instead, he congratulated him on managing to salvage 60% of the money.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic example of focusing on the positive, even in a tough situation.
Yeah.
It also demonstrates a core principle of Carnegie's understanding and appealing to the other person's wants.
Which brings us to his third principle: arouse in the other person an eager want.
Yes.
So it's not about demanding our own way, but shifting our focus to their needs and desires, right?
Absolutely. Carnegie illustrates this with a personal anecdote that I think you'll find fascinating.
Okay.
He was staying at a hotel when the manager decided to raise his rent by 300%.
300%.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What did he do?
Well, instead of arguing or getting angry, Carnegie cleverly turned the tables and focused on the manager's interests.
Okay.
He pointed out the benefits the manager would gain by having Carnegie, a well-known figure, continue to stay at the hotel and give lectures there. The publicity, the prestige, it all added up to something the manager wanted.
So he appealed to the manager's desire for profit and recognition. Did it work?
It did. The manager ended up only raising the rent by 50%, which was much more reasonable.
Oh, wow.
This shows that understanding and appealing to someone's wants can be far more effective than just demanding your own way.
It's like that famous Henry Ford quote: if there's any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own.
Right. Putting ourselves in the other person's shoes allows us to understand their perspective and tailor our approach accordingly.
Carnegie also shares a story about a Shell oil salesman who was dealing with a service station manager letting his station go downhill instead of lecturing him. The salesman took the manager to visit a successful, sparkling, clean Shell station. It was a subtle but effective way of inspiring change.
Exactly. Seeing a positive example firsthand motivated the manager to clean up his own station and improve his sales.
Yeah.
It appealed to his desire for success and recognition, which proved to be more motivating than criticism.
It seems like there's a common thread here in all of these examples.
Yeah.
Understanding people's motivations and focusing on their wants is a much more effective way to influence behavior than simply criticizing or making demands. It's about building connections and finding common ground.
And it's not about manipulation either.
Right. These techniques are about creating win-win situations where everyone feels respected and heard.
So we've covered some really insightful fundamental techniques for handling people from part 1 of Carnegie's book, but we're just getting started. The next part of our deep dive, we'll explore his 6 ways to make people like you.
Awesome. I'm excited for that.
Me too.
Get ready for some practical tips that can truly transform your interactions.
Okay. All right, let's dive into part 2 of Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, where he outlines 6 ways to make people like you.
Yeah,
These are like golden nuggets of wisdom for building genuine connections.
I agree.
I'm excited to hear what he has to say.
Me too. And what's great is that these principles are surprisingly simple, yet incredibly effective when put into practice. They really resonate with our basic human needs and desires.
Okay, so what's the first key to likability, according to Carnegie?
The first key is to become genuinely interested in other people.
Okay.
It builds on what we discussed earlier about focusing on the other person's wants and needs.
Right, but it takes it a step further. It's about cultivating genuine curiosity about the people we interact with.
But how do we make sure our interest is authentic and not just an act?
Right.
Carnegie tells a funny story about a woman who spoke to him for 45 minutes straight about her travels, completely oblivious to anything he might have wanted to share.
Oh, God.
It highlights the importance of truly listening and engaging rather than just waiting for our turn to speak.
That's such a good point. I think we've all encountered people who dominate conversations without showing any real interest in the other person, and it's definitely a turnoff.
So key number 1 is about shifting our focus from ourselves to others and being genuinely curious about their experiences. What's the next key to becoming more likable?
Carnegie's second principle is all about the power of a smile.
Right.
It might seem simple, but a genuine smile can instantly make us more approachable and likable. Think about it. When someone smiles at you, don't you automatically feel more positive towards them?
Absolutely. It's like an instant mood booster. But it's interesting that Carnegie doesn't just focus on the external impact of smiling.
Right.
He also highlights its internal effect.
Yeah.
He hears a really touching story about seeing a group of boys with disabilities climbing stairs. They were laughing and smiling despite their challenges.
That story is so powerful. It demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit and the choice we have to find joy, even in difficult circumstances.
And I think there's something contagious about a genuine smile. It can uplift not only the person smiling, but also those around them.
Exactly. When we smile, we naturally feel happier and more optimistic, and that positive energy radiates outward. It creates a ripple effect.
Okay, on to key number 3.
Okay.
Carnegie says to remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
Yeah.
It seems like such a small thing, but using someone's name shows respect and acknowledges their individuality.
It's about recognizing that each person is unique and valuable. Carnegie even talks about how Napoleon, despite all his power and responsibilities, made a point of remembering people's names. He understood the impact it had on building relationships and fostering loyalty.
It reminds me of the story Carnegie shares about the TWA flight attendant who received tons of praise for her ability to remember passenger names. It might seem like a small detail, but it made a big difference in customer satisfaction.
It shows that remembering names isn't just about good manners.
Right.
It can have a real impact on our personal and professional success. When we remember someone's name, we're telling them, you matter to me, you're important.
It's about building that connection and making people feel seen and valued, which brings us to Carnegie's 4th principle. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves.
Okay.
I'm really curious to hear your take on this one. Do you think most people are truly good listeners?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people think they are good listeners, but in reality, they're just waiting for their turn to talk. True listening requires focus, empathy, and a genuine desire to understand the other person's perspective. Carnegie believes that people are far more interested in themselves than in us, and I think he's right. We all crave the opportunity to share our thoughts and experiences.
He uses a really interesting example from the world of writing to illustrate this point. A magazine editor told him that he could tell whether an author liked people just by reading a few paragraphs of their work.
It's fascinating.
Right.
Apparently, if the author didn't genuinely like people, their stories wouldn't resonate with readers. Their lack of empathy would shine through in their writing.
It makes sense when you think about it. Our attitude towards others permeates everything we do, even our creative work.
And it reinforces the importance of cultivating a genuine interest in others, not just for the sake of making friends, but for the sake of becoming better communicators and storytellers.
Okay, on to key number 5.
All right.
Carnegie suggests that we talk in terms of the other person's interests.
Yes.
It's about finding that common ground and sparking a genuine connection.
He uses the example of Theodore Roosevelt, who was known for his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Roosevelt would spend hours researching his guests' interests before meeting them, ensuring he could engage them in conversations that were meaningful to them.
That's impressive. He really went the extra mile to make people feel seen and heard.
He understood that finding common ground and speaking to people's passions was the key to building rapport and trust.
This reminds me of a story Carnegie shares about a businessman who was trying to sell fuel to a large chain store organization. He struggled for years to get his foot in the door because the executives weren't interested in his product.
Yes. He finally realized that he needed a different approach. Instead of trying to hard sell them, he asked for their help with a debate he was preparing on the pros and cons of chain stores.
And by appealing to their expertise and showing a genuine interest in their work, he completely flipped the script. The executives, flattered by his request, welcomed him with open arms.
And guess what?
Right.
He ended up winning the contract without even making a sales pitch. It's a perfect example of how focusing on the other person's interests can lead to unexpected success.
It's like that saying, you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best way to get what we want is to focus on what the other person wants.
Exactly. It's about building those mutually beneficial relationships.
All right, we're on to the 6th and final key to likability.
Okay.
Carnegie says we need to make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. This seems so crucial, yet it's something I think a lot of people struggle with.
It's about recognizing the inherent value in each person and treating them with respect and appreciation. We all crave validation and recognition.
Carnegie tells a story about a post office clerk who was incredibly rude until he complimented the clerk on his efficiency, and suddenly the clerk's demeanor completely changed. He became friendly and helpful, going above and beyond to assist Carnegie.
It's amazing how a simple act of appreciation can transform an interaction. It shows how powerful it is to make someone feel seen and valued.
Although Carnegie emphasizes that this appreciation needs to be sincere. People can spot fake flattery a mile away, and it can actually backfire.
He gives an amusing example of how not to do it.
Yeah.
President Calvin Coolidge once complimented his secretary on her appearance, then immediately followed it up with a critique of her punctuation skills.
Oh no, he totally ruined the moment.
It highlights the importance of being genuine in our praise and focusing on the qualities we truly admire in others.
This reminds me of the story about Hall Caine, the famous novelist who was a huge admirer of the poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti. He wrote a lecture praising Rossetti's work and sent a copy to the poet himself.
And Rossetti was so touched by Caine's sincere admiration that he invited him to London to become his secretary.
It's amazing how expressing genuine appreciation can open doors and create unexpected opportunities.
It's a beautiful example of how kindness and appreciation can have a ripple effect, leading to positive outcomes for everyone involved.
So we've explored these 6 keys to likability. Becoming genuinely interested in others, smiling, remembering names, being a good listener, talking in terms of the other person's interests and making them feel important. These are all such valuable tools for building strong, positive relationships.
Absolutely. They tap into our fundamental human needs for connection, validation, and belonging.
But Carnegie doesn't stop there. He goes on to explore how to win people to our way of thinking without causing offense or resentment.
That's right. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into his principles of persuasion and influence. Get ready for some more mind-blowing insights.
Okay, so we're back, and now it's time to unpack part 3 of how to win friends and influence people. This is where Carnegie tackles the art of persuasion. But he does it in a way that emphasizes respect and building positive relationships, not manipulation or coercion. What's really striking is his first principle in this section: you can't win an argument.
Oh, that's a bold statement, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, we live in a world that seems obsessed with debating and proving each other wrong. But Carnegie argues that even when you win an argument, you often lose something far more important: the other person's goodwill and the potential for a genuine connection.
It reminds me of all those heated online arguments where people just dig in their heels and refuse to even consider another perspective.
Right.
Nobody really wins in those situations. Carnegie actually shares a personal story about a time when he himself made this mistake. He was at a dinner party and felt the urge to correct someone who misquoted Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, he jumped in to correct the person, even though nobody asked for his opinion.
It was a classic case of wanting to show off his knowledge, but it totally backfired.
Exactly. It was
Right.
a classic case of wanting to show off his knowledge, but it backfired. The person got defensive, and it created an awkward situation for everyone.
Yeah, it's a great example of how our ego can sometimes get in the way of building positive relationships. Carnegie realized that he had made the other person feel embarrassed and foolish, all for the sake of proving a trivial point.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes being right is less important than being kind.
Yeah.
And often choosing to let go of the need to win an argument can lead to a more harmonious outcome. Was that quote, Carnegie uses a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
Exactly. It highlights how forcing our opinions on others rarely leads to genuine agreement. Instead, it often creates resentment and resistance. It's
Yeah.
like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
So if we can't win an argument,
Yeah.
what's the alternative? How can we influence others without creating that kind of conflict?
Well, Carnegie suggests that instead of arguing, we should focus on understanding the other person's perspective and finding common ground.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of beginning any interaction in a friendly way, even if we disagree with the other person's views.
It makes so much sense if we start a conversation with hostility, we're immediately putting the other person on the defensive.
Right.
It reminds me of that quote by Abraham Lincoln, "A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of galls." It's much easier to persuade someone when they feel respected and heard.
Absolutely. Carnegie provides a great example of this in the business world. A company president successfully de-escalated a strike by treating the workers with respect and friendliness, even though they were in a position of conflict.
That's a powerful example of how a simple shift in attitude can make a huge difference in the outcome of a situation. Okay, so we've established that trying to win arguments is counterproductive.
Yeah.
What are some of Carnegie's more effective strategies for persuasion?
Well, he introduces a technique he calls getting the other person saying yes, yes immediately.
Okay.
The idea is to start a conversation by finding points of agreement, building a foundation of common ground before moving on to areas of disagreement.
It's like setting the stage for a more collaborative and open-minded conversation.
Exactly. By getting the other person nodding their head in agreement early on, we create a more receptive environment for our ideas.
Carnegie shares an interesting story about a salesman who finally won over a client after 13 years of trial. The key to his success was getting the client to say yes to a series of smaller points before presenting his main proposition.
Oh, that's fascinating how persistence and a strategic approach can pay off in the long run.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about playing the long game and building that trust over time.
Another one of Carnegie's persuasion principles is let the other person do a great deal of the talking. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? We often think that to persuade someone, we need to do most of the talking.
Right. It goes against our natural inclination to want to convince others of our point of view.
Right.
But Carnegie argues that giving the other person space to express themselves can be much more effective.
It's about making them feel heard and understood, which can make them more open to our perspective.
Exactly. He tells a story about a woman who repaired her relationship with her daughter by simply listening to her instead of lecturing her. And there's another great story about a man who landed a high-paying job by encouraging the interviewer to talk about himself.
Those are great examples of how shifting our focus from ourselves to the other person can lead to positive outcomes. So sometimes the best way to persuade someone is to simply listen and let them share their thoughts and feelings.
Carnegie also suggests that we let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers.
Okay.
It's a subtle art, but it's about guiding the conversation in a way that allows the other person to arrive at the desired conclusion as if it were their own idea.
It's almost like planting a seed and letting it grow organically.
Exactly. It requires a deep understanding of human psychology. Carnegie uses the example of Colonel House, who was a close advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. House was a master of subtly influencing Wilson's thinking, making the president feel like the ideas were his own.
That's incredible. It shows how powerful it can be to appeal to people's desire for autonomy and ownership. It makes them much more receptive to our suggestions.
Another essential principle for persuasion is to try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. This goes beyond just listening. It's about stepping into their shoes and trying to understand their thoughts, feelings, and motivations.
It's about cultivating empathy, which is so crucial for building any kind of meaningful connection.
Carnegie tells a story about a man who owed money and was dreading a confrontation with his creditor.
Uh,
But instead of arguing, he surprised the creditor by expressing sympathy for his problems and asking how he could help.
that's a beautiful example of how putting yourself in the other person's shoes can completely transform a situation. What was the outcome?
Well, this unexpected act of kindness completely disarmed the creditor and led to a much more favorable outcome for the man who owed the money. It shows how powerful empathy can be in diffusing conflict and creating a more positive dynamic.
It also highlights the importance of approaching difficult conversations with a spirit of generosity and understanding.
Carnegie also emphasizes the importance of being sympathetic to the other person's ideas and desires. Even if we don't agree with their perspective, it's important to validate their feelings and show that we understand where they're coming from.
It's about creating that safe space for open and honest dialogue, which is so essential for resolving conflicts and building strong relationships.
He points out that people crave sympathy and will go to great lengths to get it. By offering genuine understanding and compassion, we can create a bond of trust that makes it easier to influence them.
Carnegie then introduces an idea that might seem a bit idealistic in today's world, but he argues its incredibly effective appeal to the nobler motives. He believes that most people want to do the right thing and respond to appeals to their better nature.
It's about recognizing that people are inherently good and want to contribute to something larger than themselves.
He uses the fascinating example of Jesse James, who, despite being an outlaw, justified his robberies by claiming he was helping struggling farmers.
Even criminals, Carnegie suggests, want to see themselves as noble in some way.
Wow.
It speaks to our universal desire to believe that our actions are driven by something greater than just self-interest.
It's a fascinating insight into the human psyche. We all want to feel good about ourselves and our actions, and we often seek ways to justify our behavior even if it's not entirely aligned with our values.
It highlights the importance of understanding people's underlying motivations and appealing to their desire to be seen as good and decent.
Carnegie also emphasizes the importance of dramatizing your ideas.
Yeah.
It's about making your message vivid and memorable, using stories, anecdotes, and strong imagery to capture people's attention.
It's about making your ideas come alive and connecting with people on an emotional level.
He shares a story about a boy who dreamed of becoming a singer, but was told he had no talent. Years later, a teacher recognized his potential and inspired him to pursue his passion by praising his unique voice.
That's beautiful.
It's a reminder that our words have immense power. They can either build people up or tear them down. By choosing to encourage and inspire others, we can unlock their hidden potential and help them achieve their dreams.
And finally, Carnegie suggests that we throw down a challenge. He believes that people are motivated by a desire to excel and prove their worth.
I love this principle. It's about tapping into people's intrinsic motivation and giving them the opportunity to rise to the occasion.
He gives the example of a prison warden who successfully reformed a notorious criminal by appealing to his desire to be seen as a big person by challenging the criminal to live up to a higher standard. The warden inspired him to change his behavior.
It's incredible how a simple challenge can ignite that spark of possibility within someone and motivate them to strive for something better.
It speaks to our innate desire for growth and self-improvement.
So this whole section on persuasion is about understanding human nature and using that understanding to influence others in a positive and constructive way. It's about appealing to people's better angels and inspiring them to achieve their full potential.
It's about moving away from a win-lose mentality and embracing a more collaborative approach to communication where everyone feels respected and valued.
This has been an incredible deep dive into Dale Carnegie's timeless wisdom. We've covered so much ground, from fundamental techniques for handling people to mastering the art of persuasion and leadership.
Right.
It's amazing how relevant his principles remain, even in today's fast-paced digital world.
I know his insights offer a roadmap for building stronger relationships, communicating more effectively, and achieving greater success in all areas of our lives. It's all about approaching our interactions with a spirit of kindness, empathy, and genuine interest in others.
But here's a final thought for you to consider. As you go out into the world and put these principles into practice, Carnegie's methods rely heavily on sincerity.
Yeah.
So how can you apply these principles authentically in your own life? Where might you need to adjust your own attitude or approach to truly connect with others and inspire them?
That's the challenge Carnegie leaves us with. It's not enough to simply understand these principles intellectually. We must embody them, make them a part of who we are, and use them to create positive change in the world.
We hope this deep dive into how to win friends and influence people has given you some valuable insights and practical tools to enhance your communication and build more meaningful relationships. And if you want to explore even more of Carnegie's wisdom, we highly encourage you to check out the full book. It's a true classic for a reason.